Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. What is the Timberwolves' identity? We're more than a third of the way through the season. And what is this team? What are they trying to be? What are they to the rest of the league? What happens next for this team? Also, can they fix the rebounding issues? Plus, a preview of Wolves Heat on Monday night. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic Christmas weekend. This is a Wolves game day. The Timberwolves take on the Heat this evening in South Beach. We're going to preview that here at the end of the show. Plenty to get to first, though. First, the very first thing I want to say, that was a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also, of course, watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Roku app or the Amazon Fire TV app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at B-Beacon, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, I want to start today by talking about the Timberwolves' identity. We'll get to the Heat matchup later. I want to talk about rebounding, which I think is it's certainly part of the identity conversation. And generally speaking, I don't love the kind of really vague conversations such as the one I'm about to have about like, hey, what's this team about? Like, what are they? A lot of it's very cliche, right? Team's identity, stuff like that. But I really mean it with this conversation. I think this is completely legitimate. This isn't just a cliche. Like, what is this team actually good at? Is maybe a better way to say it, but it's a less people know generally what you mean when you say what's the identity of this team, right? What's this team actually good at? What are they not good at? What do other teams prepare for when they prepare to play against the Wolves? Like, diving into the stats. If you look at the teams rankings league wide in a lot of categories this year, the thing I couldn't get out of my head is that this team with all the pack slogans, right? Like the video series Track the Pack, and like I'm trying to remember what some of the older ones were, Run with the Pack, like all the different marketing slogans with the name pack. I mean, this year's slogan should really be middle of the pack or come join the middle of the pack, right? This team is not actually really good at anything. Now, last year's team, the identity of the 2021-22 Timberwolves was that they were defensively aggressive, right? They came into the year people thinking, the Wolves are bad defensively because they had been forever. But last year they were defensively aggressive. They were, blitzing pick and roll. They were wreaking havoc, causing turnovers. Basically the entire first 3 quarters of the season, they were one of the league's best shot blocking teams, best steal rate teams, best at turning the other team over. They committed a lot of fouls because they were playing at a breakneck speed defensively. Jade McDaniels and Patrick Beverly and Anthony Edwards and Jared Vanderbilt, these guys just flying around wreaking havoc, right? They committed a lot of fouls, but they generated a lot of turnovers. They got a lot of fast break points out of it. They played fast. And then offensively, they were a high ceiling, not low floor, but like pretty, a decently low floor, right? A kind of a middle floor, but a really high ceiling offensively because they were fun to watch. They were making threes. They were generating highlights in the open floor from Ant mostly, and in the half court from Ant. The dunks were way up last year. But more importantly, they shot more threes. They made more threes. Certainly Malik Beasley was a big part of that. But, Towns was, well, first of all, on the floor for the entire first part of last season. But when he was making shots at a higher clip than he is so far this year. As a team, they had this identity of we'll play fast, we'll score on you, we'll score in the open floor, we'll jack threes in the half court. Malik Beasley will get hot, and then Cat will get hot. We'll play inside and out with Cat. We'll do whatever. We'll play off of. Really, it was more we'll play outside in with Cat, right? We'll play him on the perimeter. He'll pump fake. He'll drive. He'll create offense. And everything just kind of fit together. This year, what is that identity? Like, what are we looking at when we watch the Timberwolves? Defensively, they're completely different, right? No Jared Vanderbilt, no Patrick Beverly. You all of a sudden have 2 less guys on the defensive roster who are mobile, switchable, great. That high wall, that aggressive blitzing pick and roll coverage was perfect for those two guys. And they still got, Ant and Jaden McDaniels are good at that. And we actually saw, Rudy play a little bit of it last week. But with Rudy Gobert, you're going to be a drop pick and roll coverage team. That's largely what the Wolves have been. And we've talked about this specific portion of the conversation before on the show, that it's like the Wolves just kind of relaxed and said, okay, the perimeter defenders relaxed and said, we got Rudy Gobert behind us, the best shot blocker of this generation, one of the best drop defenders in recent memory. We don't need to be as tight as we were last year defensively on the perimeter. I think it's gotten a little better of late, certainly during that mini winning streak a week and a half ago or so. But I think that's a big issue defensively. I think the fact that they're playing a more laid back coverage, drop coverage, and they're being forced to switch more because the drop coverage has been shoddy at times, because the point of attack defense containing the ball in the perimeter has been bad. Not necessarily Rudy's fault, but Ant hasn't been consistent enough on the ball. D'Lo hasn't been consistent enough on the ball. Jaylen Noel certainly in increased minutes off the bench. There's been issues with his defense once again. The on-ball defense has not been good enough. But all that to say, defensively, the Wolves just simply aren't turning teams over like they were last year. Their turnover rate so far this year defensively, they're still 11th, which isn't bad. But for most of last season, they were the best team in the league, certainly top 3. But they're 11th in defensive turnover rate. The opponent free throw rate started the year pretty good. It's now back to where it was last year. I mean, last year they were in the 20s all year in terms of league-wide ranking. Now they're 19th in opponent free throw rate. They're starting to foul just as much as they did last year, but without the aggressiveness that they showed last year. Yeah, the steal rate's still good. They generate a lot of steals. They do get, some blocks. But because they're just not generating the turnovers at the same clip and they're still not rebounding the ball, that means opponents are just simply getting better shots and making those shot attempts. The Timberwolves allow the most 3-point attempts by opponent of any team in the league this year. They're 30th in opponent 3-point attempts per game. And I mean, you look at last year. Where'd that number go for last year? I have it right here. Last year, they were still bottom 5, but they were 26, but they were still generating more turnovers last season. They were second in turnover rate for the entire season, for much of the year last year, up until the defense started to struggle late. But the offense, by the way, covered up a lot of that because the offense clicked late last season. They were 25th in made threes per game for opponents, I should say, but they were still second in turnover rate. This year, they're 11th in turnover rate, and they're dead last in allowing opponents to take and make threes against them. And that's obviously a major issue. Opponents are shooting the 4th best 3-point percentage against the Wolves, or the Wolves are 4th worst in opponent 3-point percentage, if you want to look at it that way. So couple that with a decrease in forcing turnovers, couple that with continued bad defensive rebounding and a bad opponent free throw rate. And that's going to really impact a defense that otherwise is solid in the half court. I mean, I said the slogan should be join the middle of the pack. The Wolves are 16th in defensive rating. I mean, like, the defense has pretty much hovered between like 13 and 19 all season for the Wolves, right? That hasn't been an awful defense, because when they're set in the half court, it's actually pretty good in terms of initial actions, right? If teams just want to pass the ball once or twice and take a shot against the Wolves, they're probably not going to be ultra successful. But if they can get out in the fast break and run against the Wolves transition defense before, if you want to call it a transition defense, before the Wolves can get set defensively, they will have success. If they swing the ball from side to side, make the Wolves move their feet and be crisp in their rotations, they're going to have success. If you can get a shot up and get an offensive rebound, then you're going to have success. The Wolves give up a ton of offensive rebounds and second chance points. So combine all those things. The Wolves are good if they can play solid defense for the first few seconds of the shot clock, force a shot, and then secure the rebound. But because they're still a bad defensive rebounding team, the Wolves are what, 26th in the league in defensive rebound percentage, and this was a huge issue against Boston in the loss on Friday, then you're going to have success against the Wolves. That's an identity that looked different last year. So what is the Wolves' identity? Like a good first reaction, half-court defensive team? Because offensively, there is absolutely no identity. They're middle of the pack in three-point rate, which is way down from last year. They're 16th in three-point rate. Offensively, they are 15th in free throw rate. So exactly middle of the pack in three-point rate and free throw rate. They are 24th in three-point percentage this year. I mean, like, what? They also don't offensive rebound like they did last year. Last year, the Wolves are actually a pretty good offensive rebounding team. They're 20th this year in offensive rebound rate. The only thing that they're really good at is playing fast. They play with great pace. So this is a team that plays fast and is a decent half-court defensive team. But they're not a great three-point shooting team. They don't turn teams over defensively. They aren't really able to speed teams up defensively. They don't rebound the ball well. They're not a gritty team. They don't get to the line a bunch. They're not somebody who's going to, they're not a team that's going to, it's not a Chris Finch slash Sachin Gupta, or you bring back Gerson Rosas. Like it's not a Rio Grande Valley Vipers team. They're not getting to the line a bunch. They're not shooting a bunch of threes. They're not making a bunch of threes. They're not making a bunch of free throws. They're not creating turnovers defensively. This isn't the way the Wolves ideally would want to play. And a big part of that is adding Rudy Gobert to the fold. That's the major part of it, right? It's the same head coach, the same star players when you look at Towns, Edwards, Russell still being on the team, but it's adding Gobert to the equation and then losing those role guys like a Vando and a Beasley and not replacing them with like players. And long term, this may still work out. This isn't at all to suggest that like I'm not doing the thing where I'm jumping off the deep end and saying Connolly's the worst and this was the worst trade ever. It's starting to look tenuous at best, right? I mean, like, I'll admit that. A lot could still happen. It takes teams. Remember last year, the Boston Celtics were below 500 at this point. And actually, I think it was almost a year ago to the day. It might have been the 27th of December last year that the Timberwolves beat the Celtics with like 7 guys out with COVID on the Wolves last year, right? The Celtics went to the finals, right? Like this, things can still change. I'm not saying the Wolves are going to go to the finals this year. I think that's unlikely, but things could still change. The point here is we're still searching. And now with Towns out and Rudy having missed some time and, a lot of time missed for guys here and there for various things, Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, Torian Prince, like rotation guys, like that hasn't helped things, right? And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, setting that clock back further of Rudy and Kat actually playing together, like we could be talking another month before that happens. And will it be this year? Will it be next year before we start feeling better about this trade? This could still work. But the point is that sitting here right now, getting closer and closer to the midway point of the season, there's a lot of ambiguity to what the Wolves actually are as a team, what they're actually what are they even trying to do? Certainly, what are they being successful at doing? And that's an issue. All right. Next, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about rebounding. There's a lot of carnage. So there will be blood when we talk about the Timberwolves rebounding. We'll do that next. Then I want to preview Wolves Heat in Miami Monday night. We'll do all that here next. First, though, today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball, of course, hockey, college basketball. We're getting into the meat of the conference schedule here shortly. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. Go check out what the Wolves are what the line looks like in Miami Monday night. Of course, Jimmy Butler questionable, which is going to have a big impact on this line, I think. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way that you can get your betting info. Head to their website today. Again, that's betonline.net, or use your mobile device, find their app to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Make sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's talk rebounding, because this is a thing, like I mentioned it in the last segment. The Wolves are 26th overall in terms of, or I should say 26th in defensive rebounding. They're 20th in offensive rebounding, which again, last year was much greater. I'm mostly talking about defensive rebounding, because offensive rebounding, it's basically Rudy and that's it. But the Wolves have been bad enough in terms of transition defense that they can't be hunting offensive rebounds, right? They just need to get better shots on offense and worry about getting back defensively, because they have too many guys that like to shoot and then linger instead of like shoot and crash or shoot and get back. Now in the NBA, usually you're shooting and you're releasing down the floor to try and catch up to the person that probably contested and released because the book is out against the Timberwolves, right? So the Wolves should not be crashing the glass. It's basically Rudy, sometimes Nas or Cat, and that's it. Defensively speaking, though, on the defensive end of the floor, the rebounding must improve by basically all players not named Rudy Gobert. And even Rudy is down slightly from where he was last couple years, by the way. I talked about this with Marnie on the live postcast on Friday night after Wolves Celtics. We talked about this towards the end of the postcast. And it's one of the things I brought up on the show a lot, but I think it bears repeating. I just told the kids basketball team I coached this the other day. The only ways you can end a possession for the opponent are by allowing a made shot, generating a turnover, or getting a defensive rebound, right? Those are the only ways you can do it. So if you're not allowing a made shot, which is obviously the goal is to not allow a made shot, you're not generating turnovers, which the Wolves are not doing this year they're 11th in the league. So they are doing it, but not to the same clip they were last year, second in the league for the entire season. The only way you can end a possession is by securing a defensive rebound. And I think all too often it's forgotten that that is a part of defense. When you talk about the league's defensive teams, the reason why defensive rebounding is included in all the different defensive metrics, both individually and as a team, is because that's how you end a possession successfully. You can't rely on the fluky turnovers as much as the Wolves have this season. The dead ball turnovers, teams throwing the ball out of bounds, or gambling to generate a live ball turnover, which is great. And the Wolves did that pretty well last year for much of the season until it started to bite them towards the end of the year when good teams learn how to exploit the high wall coverage. But defensive rebounding is more important than ever this season because you don't have Jared Vanderbilt and Patrick Beverley, and you're not playing a blitz, a high wall blitzing defensive pick and roll coverage. You're not flying around defensively like you were last year. It's basically Ant is the guy who's doing that now with mixed success. But the problem is he's also your best on-ball defender, not named Jaden McDaniels. And so Ant is oftentimes not allowed to kind of play free safety as he did at times last season, for better or for worse. But now Ant's kind of locked into that key defensive matchup, and there's less of that potential for the home run play that there may have been last season. Basically, all non-Rudy players need to improve defensively. The ones that I call out the most often on this show are Ant, simply because he should be better. Although I have to say, I don't want to focus on him because I actually think Ant's been pretty good on the defensive glass so far this year compared to where he has been. Now, that's nowhere near where he could be because of his physical gifts. He's so good, so talented in terms of his size and his physicality and his athleticism that obviously Ant's rebound rate should be better. But that's improved this season compared to where he had been. So, let's look at this. So last year, his rebound rate was 7.5%. As a rookie, it was 7.9% total. This year, it's 9.1%. But on the defensive glass, he's more than 3 points up. He's 15.6% this year, up from 12.5% last year. And it wasn't good early on in the season, like in October, early November. It's continued to improve. So I need to give Ant props for improving. There's guys, though, that just have not gotten better and must get better. Jaden McDaniels is kind of case in point. And actually, I saw a tweet. I think it was Jace Frederick the other day that tweeted that Jace Frederick from, of course, the Pioneer Press tweeted that Jaden McDaniels was, I think, in the 3rd percentile among players at his possession in defensive rebounding rate. I mean, I don't know what players at his position means exactly, but I went ahead and I looked up Jaden McDaniels on our friends at B-Ball Index to see where he ranked in terms of overall percentile. Because actually, real quick, let me give his actual rebound rate numbers. He was 8.7% last year, total rebound rate, 13.2% defensive rebound rate. Not great, but okay for a player who is still playing a lot at the small forward position. It actually really wasn't okay. But compared to this year, it was, right? This year, he's got a 6.4% total rebound rate, 8.2% defensive rebound rate. You're talking about a guy that's basically 6'9", if not taller, ultra athletic, long arms, and is also playing mostly at the power forward position so far this season for the Wolves. And he has a defensive rebound rate of 8.2%. You know who has higher defensive rebound rates on the Timberwolves than Jaden McDaniels? Jordan McLaughlin, D'Angelo Russell, Austin Rivers. The only semi-quasi-rotation guy on this team, Jalen Noel, to throw out another name that isn't a good rebounder but is better than Jaden McDaniels this year. The only quasi-rotation player who's below Jaden McDaniels in defensive rebound rate this season is Bryn Forbes, 3.7%. It's completely unacceptable for Jaden McDaniels to be the team's worst rebounder when you factor in all the other factors, right? Like, you expect your point guards to be meh rebounders if you compare their rate to everybody else. But I don't want to let them off the hook because the Wolves' biggest issue, it's not Rudy. Cat, his rebound rate is down a little this year, but relatively limited sample. Nas is actually better on the glass this season. He hasn't been great, but better than he has been. So I don't want to spend too much time on Nas. And Ant's been better too. The issue is everybody else, and that includes certainly Jaden McDaniels. He's the main culprit. But plenty of other guys, like the guards haven't rebounded their weight either. D'Angelo Russell is another great example of somebody who has to rebound the ball better. He's a big guard. He's not ultra athletic, but he's got instincts. He's a smart player. He's big. Currently, right now, D'Angelo Russell is tied for his lowest defensive rebound rate of his career. And that's tied with himself 2 years ago in that second COVID-shortened NBA season when D'Lo had all the injuries. He only played 42 games. 8.9%. Every other season of his career, he's over 10%. For his career overall, he has a defensive rebound rate of 11.1%. May not sound like a huge difference between 8.9% and 11.1%, but it is. I mean, that's a significant downward progression, I guess, or regression. I don't know. So the defensive rebound rate for D'Lo's not good. The defensive rebound rate for, like, Taurean Prince obviously hasn't played in a while, but his is down too. And Jaden McDaniels is below both of them in terms of defensive rebound rate. You simply cannot have and remember now, with no Cat, he is the power forward. You can't have your starting power forward with a defensive rebound rate of 8.2%. You can't have your starting power forward have a defensive rebound rate lower than your starting point guard. It's not tenable for a team that's supposed to be a good team. Like, I know that sounds dramatic, but it's a huge issue. And this team was out rebounded by the Celtics on Friday by overall by 8. They gave up 20 offensive rebounds to the Boston Celtics. Every player in their starting lineup had at least 2 offensive boards. Luke Cornett off the bench had 5 offensive boards in 10 minutes. Jaden McDaniels is a major issue at that end of the floor right now in that specific area in terms of defensive rebounding. And this team as a whole has to improve. But I look at Jaden, I look at Ant needing to be consistent, Nas needing to be consistent, and I look at the other backcourt players, Jalen Noel, D'Angelo Russell, Jordan McLaughlin when he gets back. Those guys have to pull their weight and grab a couple boards a game. Like, just grab a couple boards a game more than you have been. And this team's probably a game or two better in terms of their record. Like, they've literally lost games because they've been such a bad defensive rebounding team. Okay. I want to close the show today by talking Wolves Heat on Monday night, what that matchup looks like, an interesting injury report as well. There's a lot going on with the Heat, especially. So we're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by the NHTSA. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks, but a few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. But no, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, Wolves Heat on Monday night from Miami, a place that the Timberwolves have actually played pretty well here of late. There's some memorable games. Remember the D'Lo block on Jimmy Butler? I think it was the COVID year before COVID, like right after D'Lo joined the team. They've had some memorable wins there. The Heat themselves have been disappointing this season. They've lost a couple in a row. They've been playing better since the Wolves beat them last, which was, I don't know, almost 3 weeks ago now. They were like 7-11 at the time. The Wolves won. That was that infamous game in which, or the game in which Rudy Gobert infamously had 0 shot attempts for the entire game. Didn't even get to the line until crunch time and then hit those big free throws to get the Wolves. Ultimately, it was, I believe, a 5-point win. The Heat have played better since then. They recently had a 4-game winning streak, won 5 out of 6. But then they just lost at home to the Bulls by 10 this week and then lost at home to the Pacers in a game in which Jimmy Butler sprained his ankle and is now questionable for Monday's game. So we can go ahead and hit that injury report here first because I think it's significant. So Jimmy Butler's questionable. He sprained his ankle and left that loss to the Pacers the other day. So he's obviously the biggest one, and he missed that first game. Bam Adebayo is questionable. He's played in the last 3, but had missed a game prior to that. He's got a shoulder issue and is listed as questionable for Monday. They're the big ones. Those are the biggest names, the most important ones. But both Caleb Martin and Gabe Vincent are on the injury report. Martin's probable with an ankle. Gabe Vincent is questionable with a knee. And those guys are role players. They played roles in the last game against the Wolves. Actually, I guess Vincent didn't play that time. But the last time these teams played, the Heat looked differently because there was no Butler, because there was no, let's see, who else missed that game? Let's see. There's no, no Tyler Hero in that game, obviously. So in that game, Max Struss started for the Heat. Caleb Martin started for the Heat. Nikola Jovic, who isn't even in the rotation currently, started for the Heat in that game. There was Kyle Lowry, there was Bam Adebayo, but Bam pretty much had his way. Rudy didn't score until the final minutes of the game. Bam had 17 and 15 plus 5 assists that last time around against the Wolves. But like Jovic started, isn't in the rotation. Struss and Martin are very much rotation guys for this team. And this team is going to look different with or without Jimmy Butler, because Tyler Hero's been playing so well lately. Hero had 28 in the loss to the Pacers the other day. He is the primary player the Wolves have to concentrate on stopping. The Heat play methodically. Their offense isn't great. They've been kind of bottom 5 offensively all season league wide. And with no Butler, it's basically Tyler Hero. And then, pick and roll. Adebayo is a roller. The Heat don't do much in terms of points in the paint. They're like 20. Let's see, what are they? 26th in terms of points in the paint per game this year in the NBA. The Wolves are, of course, on the reverse side of that. They're like 6th or 7th in the league in points in the paint. So if the Wolves do a good job on Hero on the perimeter, which is a big if, it's basically guarding the 3-point line. And Miami's not like a flame-throwing team from deep, but that's how they're going to beat you. They're 8th in 3-point attempts per game, 7th in 3-point rate. Miami is, but they're 21st in percentage from deep, because like Kyle Lowry's down a little bit shooting the ball outside the arc. Hero's a tick under 41% from outside the arc, and he's been healthy here of late. Again, missed that game against the Wolves, but he's played in 25 games this year. Besides Hero, Caleb Martin's the only other guy that really sniffs 40%. So guard the 3-point line, stay home on shooters, make Tyler Hero's life difficult, but you got to make other guys beat you. Like Kyle Lowry's not the player he was 3, 4, 5 years ago. He can still make open threes. He's 36% from there, and he's, of course, going to take a ton of them. It's like 2/3 of his shots are 3-point attempts. But if you can make things difficult for Hero, nobody else can really beat you on this Heat team if there's no Jimmy Butler. Obviously, if Butler plays, now you've got 2 guys you got to worry about, and it's the role players. It's Adebayo on the short on the roll. It's Lowry spotting up from outside the arc. In general, they just have to guard the 3-point line against this team. They're not a great rebounding team either. Miami's not. They're good defensive rebounding the ball, but the Wolves don't really crash the glass anyway. So the biggest thing here is play fast, because the Heat would prefer not to. Play fast, guard the 3-point line against Miami, and just kind of muck things up for Tyler Hero. That's kind of it. Those are the keys to this one. It's a winnable game for Minnesota if Butler doesn't play. Again, this is a Miami team. It's actually got I believe, an identical record to the Wolves, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, an identical record to the Wolves. Yet another team. I mean, we could look at the Mavs last week. Same thing, right? Same record. A disappointing team so far. Miami's in that category. Maybe their expectations weren't as high as Dallas or Minnesota, I don't think, this year. But an underperforming team with a banged-up star in Jimmy Butler who may not play, and a place the Wolves have played pretty well. But an important win to get, because where do the Wolves go next? They have to go at New Orleans and at Milwaukee. Milwaukee just dropped on Christmas Day. They lost to Boston by 20. But Milwaukee's one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the entire league. New Orleans all of a sudden looks like a top 5 team. So a very difficult road trip. This is the last game that the Wolves, like if Butler doesn't play, there's a world in which you could see the Wolves being favored in this game. Like it's close to a pick 'em, I think, if Butler doesn't play. So if Butler doesn't play, the Wolves have to win this game. If he doesn't play, or if he does play, they obviously should still be competitive, right? I mean, Miami's still a 500 team, and Jimmy Butler's been, he's played in, how many games has he played in this year overall? He's been relatively healthy. He's played 21 games, so he's played in like a little more than 2/3 of Miami's games. Or roughly 2/3 of their games. So this is still a team with Butler the Wolves should be able to beat. But without Butler, they really have to win this game, given this road trip and how difficult it is, and also where the team sits right now, a game under 500 with no Cat in sight on the floor for Minnesota. All right, we will go live after the game. We'll do the postcast with Marnie Gellner, Bally Sports North, about 45 minutes after the game ends, and then we'll have a full post-game pod that posts on Tuesday. It looks like a pretty normal week schedule-wise for us here at the show. So make sure you're following and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can watch on YouTube as well as listen on any of the audio platforms. The postcast is on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page, but you can find the audio right here. In fact, the track before this one, the episode before this one on whatever audio platform you're listening to, is Friday's live postcast from Wolves Celtics with Marnie. So you can go ahead and listen to that here if you missed the live show on YouTube. You can also, of course, watch this show on Locked On Sports Minnesota. That's the Roku app and Amazon Fire TV. You can download Locked On Sports Minnesota and watch all of our episodes. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now go ahead and make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Once again, I'm Ben Beacon. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.